issue really is the existence of the union itself. That is, it's very difficult. They don't want the union around. No employer particularly wants the union around. They'd much rather have people operating by themselves, fragmented, isolated, alone, so they can be controlled and manipulated. The union, essentially, is the response of teaching assistants and students on this campus to that situation. They found that they were alienated from the institution. They couldn't do anything, so they came together to try to do something about it. That's a force. That's a counter-institution to this institution.
I came here in the fall of 1945, and Professor Selig Perlman asked me to be his TA. That was the year a great number of GIs came back. I worked very hard. I taught in 4 different courses as an assistant that year, and met with him regularly. We discussed what we were teaching, what text to use, all the things that TAs are demanding as part of contracts we've always had with the professors. I think the TA is making a very serious mistake in thinking that they can close the university down.
The Teaching Assistants Association, the TAA, first formed in 1966 to bring TAs from different departments together to compare and discuss workplace issues.
TAs were the ones that were doing the work. They didn't have as much time to devote to their own studies because they were teaching. Mm-hmm. They sometimes had lower grades, and therefore when cutbacks were made, they were the ones that were booted out, and people that had been on fellowship were then given the support. The TA contracts.
Yes, that would be
those sort of things, you know, and then just the idea that we had a right to a contract, we had a right to a grievance procedure, and all sorts of things that I had never thought about. You know, when you seem so thankful when you come in as a graduate student to have any sort of support at all. It was hard. It was an identity change, thinking of yourself as a worker rather than as a student, sort of submissive to the faculty and doing what they said. And it was a gradual process for me, I think, but I just got indignant.
The problems that we had in the early stages of organizing for the strike was that the situation of TAs in the various departments was very different, not just financially, but in terms of work situation and a relationship with faculty. And
so
the major problem in German, the major problem in German was convincing people that even though things were good in German, and then good in terms of personal relationships with faculty, in terms of pay, they were abysmal, that things were very bad for other people, and that if any of us were going to get anything, together we had to support some of the issues which were important to people in geology, while at the same time they would be supporting things that were important to us. So in graduate school, you know, you really are very much confined to your specific department. Unlike an undergraduate, you're taking all your courses in your department in most cases. You spend all your time in the department. And even in Van Nuys, where, you know, you have, I don't know how many language departments, and like the French department is just one floor down from German. I knew no one in the French department until the strike. And I think that's to a certain extent a commentary on the university and not just on the TAA, the kind of fragmentation of not only knowledge but of people. And so I think what was important was to keep that departmental identity and at the same time link it up with the broader TAA identity.
About the union we were trying to create, what kind of union it was going to be, why it was a long-term project, talked about the nature of the university, why it needed to be changed, how the TA could help do that.
In 1969, a majority of TAs signed cards authorizing the TAA to be their union, and the TAA demanded recognition. The university refused to recognize the union without an election. The TAA and the university then agreed on how the election would be organized and what terms could be bargained should the union win recognition. The TAA won the election by a large margin. The TAA then represented all campus TAs as an independent and unaffiliated union. For its first contract, the TAA sought job security of at least 3 years, a limit on class sizes, a grievance procedure to deal with workplace issues, and an innovative educational reform that would incorporate TAs and students into course planning with professors.
There was an election last spring in the middle of May in which the union won 77% of the vote. among all TAs on the campus, which gave us recognition as exclusive collective bargaining agent. And then we began bargaining with the university on May 28th, and we met with the university bargaining team, several times a week throughout a great part of the summer, and at least once a week all the way through to January 8th. During that time, there was, for all practical purposes, no progress at all. On January 8th, the union decided that it would recess bargaining. What we meant by that was we would go back and talk at the bargaining table any time that they had something serious they wanted to talk about, but that our membership was essentially tired of being horsed around at that bargaining table. Nothing was occurring. So between January 8th and I guess the first week in March, the union decided what it would have to do to get a just and equitable contract.
These are the same guys who between 1946 and 52 and 53 purged all of the lefties from the labor unions. Then in the mid-50s, they spent a small period in which they stabilized collective bargaining between management and labor. And when the university started to blow up in the early 60s, mid-60s, they moved into administrative positions. There are a whole load of them, all of them industrial relations, mediator, manipulator type people.
Major importance, as far as we are concerned, is this matter of bargaining. The university has for months sat at the table, played games, if you will, but bargaining is something they have not done. And this is the major point in this struggle and the major gain that must be made. Otherwise, the future for bargaining for TAs, teachers, or anyone else in the public sector will not progress.
Beginning of the bargaining team, comes back to summarize it, is that the university last offer provided essentially no guarantees of economic benefits. In terms of procedural guarantees and rights to things like appointments and evaluation, it leaves a large number of loopholes that are very undesirable. And in terms of educational planning, it provides essentially nothing at all. For that reason, the TA bargaining team moved rejection of the last university offer.
And I think everybody should be aware of what a strike entails. There are certain things that we have to take into consideration. Number one, you probably will get a notice that you're discharged. Number two, they may bring police on the campus. Number three, there could be violence. Number four, you may never get your job back. Number five, the union could be crushed.
TAs voted to strike by a large margin. Spirits were high. They were now on the eve of the first TA strike in the history of the United States. A victory would inspire TAs in other universities with similar issues. Preparations for the strike were intense.
We had departmental meetings in the departments. We had parties. We had meetings in people's houses. I mean, we had a full infrastructure of departmental representatives and so forth. And the people on the bargaining team and some of the executive committee were divided up into teams. I think there was, I don't remember how many were. There were at least 3 teams, probably more. And
Of how many?
There was a core of 3 people on a team or something. And I bet I went to 2 or 3 meetings a day. And that's all I did for 2 months.
The strike began on March 16, 1970. TAA members set up picket lines outside classroom buildings, urging students not to cross them.
Figures, call. Then I saw 745, should have been 653, actually 71, 11%. 850, less than 20%. 955, less than 19%. 11 o'clock, 16%.
The TAA reached out to students for support. Drawn by the TAA's advocacy of educational reform that would give students a voice in course planning, undergraduates formed a strike support committee. In addition to boycotting classes, many students joined picket lines.
The university's most recent contract proposal does not offer TAs and their families the security all workers need and demand, and it does not face up to the crisis of undergraduate education. This union can never accept such a contract, and until the university talks more reasonably, the strike will go on. Now, one reason that Mr. Young and administration spokesman have given that they've withdrawn the educational planning, I want to stress this, is that they say they've received many letters from senior faculty members who say that if any agreement at all is reached on educational planning, they will resign from the university. Now, one such letter, which is signed by 21 members of the Math Department, involves 21 senior faculty members, only 3 of whom teach an undergraduate course which is involved with teaching assistants. All of these 21 senior faculty members together teach a total of only 26 courses this semester. Now, supposedly, these are men who are speaking out in concern about undergraduate education. They have very little to do with undergraduate education. 3 of them have written textbooks which they force students in their courses, large numbers of students, thousands of students, to read, to use. Maybe that's their major concern. Certainly their concern is not with teaching undergraduates, although they are now being used by the administration spokesman as the excuse for no longer bargaining educational plans.
That question is addressed to me. We'll have the minimum number of police around that we feel necessary. There are people in this community who take advantage of any situation to disrupt.
In fact, the university flooded the campus with uniformed and plainclothes police. The TAA reached out to area unions. Several key unions, including the Teamsters, honored the TAA picket lines.
Has scheduled a 3-day conference for the State Firemen's Association. There were about 85 of them in town from all over the state. So we picketed the Wisconsin Center yesterday when it was supposed to start. And they all came up, and we handed them our leaflets, and they refused to cross our picket line. What this points up very clearly is that unless we have good picket lines, unless we refuse to let the police intimidate our picket lines, everything will come through. It's only when we establish good labor picket lines that we're going to stop things from coming through. Trucks are coming up, and they say, damn it, don't ask us to stop. If you tell us to stop, we can. And they're turning around and leaving. The buses are off permanently. They won't be running at all anymore. The Teamsters sent 3 business agents down there and told the university administrators to eat shit. They're not running anymore.
The university resorted to desperate measures to get essential supplies across the picket lines. German Department TA Patricia Russian wrote to a friend.
There was a momentous and dramatic confrontation on the picket line. A Union Carbide truck was trying to make a delivery of liquid nitrogen to the loading dock at the back of the chemistry department. TAA picket lines had prevented delivery to that department for 2 weeks. Multiple research projects allegedly were on the verge of being disrupted. As a last resort, Union Carbide tried to make a stealth late delivery, but the Teamster truck driver refused to cross our frantically reinforced picket line. Suddenly, a Union Carbide executive appeared, who evidently had been flown in from Indiana, ordered the Teamster out of the cab, and personally drove the truck past the line to the loading dock. I'll never forget the Teamster trucker who was near tears, repeatedly apologizing for not being able to stop the delivery and support our strike. That will remain for me my enduring memory of real labor solidarity.
The strike coincided with major labor actions around the country, including a wildcat walkout strike by postal workers. The Teaching Assistants Association, with undergraduate students, staged solidarity rallies and marches in support of the postal workers. Meanwhile, the university attempted to break the strike by employing tactics from the infamous Mohawk Valley formula that had first been used in 1936 against striking workers at Remington Rand.
A number of things that go into the Mohawk Valley formula, and Young has used just about all of them. The first one we've talked about a lot. That's the old red baiting. Split everybody off from the left. The leaders are agitators, they're red. If the leaders aren't red, then there's certainly a bunch of reds somewhere in the Union. Another one that they use a little different here, but that's called the plant move. As soon as the Union forms, the plant is going to move somewhere else. Young has been telling us the same goddamn thing. There's not going to be any more TA. Another thing they always brought in was the Citizens Council. People from the community who were upset about all of this, who wanted things to run as normal. We saw the first day of the strike, I think. Ed Young had a bunch of people from the engineering school. He gave them some of his precious television time. Also, the violence threat. There's going to be trouble. We know there's going to be trouble, and we're going to bring in a lot of cops. We're going to bring in a lot of guards to stop that. That one hasn't worked either. And finally, the big lie. The place is operating at normal capacity.
The university last Friday offered the TAA a very modest economic package. However, still in dispute between the TA and the university are several issues which essentially revolve around the area of political and intellectual control of teaching assistants. The university is insisting that it's not prepared to bargain educational planning, an extremely important issue to teaching assistants. It's still insisting, for example, that the union guarantee that it will never strike for any reason whatsoever, regardless. It's also insisting that it will only guarantee that it will not take reprisals against teaching assistants as teaching assistants on the theory that professors' academic freedom to take reprisals against teaching assistants as graduate students cannot be infringed upon. They are still insisting that the contract run for a period of time until such a point that the TAA would be impotent to renegotiate a contract, and that no new proposals can be made to change whatever contract would be agreed to until late spring or in the summertime. So in those areas we're still substantially apart, and we're at the present deadlocked on those issues.
Using all of its institutional clout, the university sought a court injunction to stop the strike.
We appreciate very much what he's been doing to help us. In fact, he has not said so, but I believe that the Attorney General's office has been giving a great deal of service to the university, which they're not required to do by statute, and I'm sure not budgeted. We've stretched their staff very hard in these times.
On April 1st, Judge William Sachin granted the university's petition for an injunction, declaring the strike illegal. The TAA defied his order and continued the strike.
Dealing with extremely hostile, bourgeois fucking court.
Almost every group in this country that's ever organized collectively to change things has been declared illegal at one time or another.
In other words, both sides know the test is coming now.
But by the end of the third week of the strike, now declared illegal, increasing numbers of students were beginning to return to class.
Don't cross the picket line. Don't strike, break the place. Hey, don't strike, break. Think about it. Don't go to class. Stay away. Don't Stay the hell out of there. Hey, the education's not here. It's not in there. They're going solely out of fear. The administration doesn't have their love, their admiration, their respect. They're not going because they think the edifice of education is so fantastic and offering them great things. They're going because they're afraid, which is one, just one hell of a commentary on exactly the way this situation runs here.
On April 9th, with students drifting back to class, a limited ability to shut down research, and contempt of court citations having been issued against 21 members for defying the injunction, TAA members voted to end the strike and ratify the contract. They didn't see a way forward that was likely to win major additional gains.
The motion I wish to make is this, that the TAA vote the contract as it stands now, and that we cease from the strike.
The one that was impossible to get, essentially, was our educational planning clause. And in retrospect, it's very clear why that was so tough, but we were so naive then as not to understand that anything that would fundamentally alter the power relationship with the university would be the most threatening.
The issue was whether or not this union was going to exist as an institution that would implement and enforce change around here, radical change if necessary.
For their first contract, the Wisconsin TAs gained valuable job security rights, class size limits, and due process through grievance arbitration and evaluations, even if they had not been able to win their educational reform proposal. It had taken an enormous collective effort to launch the union. That effort had paid off with a tremendous victory that established the union as the collective bargaining agent with a contract to build off of for the future.
Strike of the Madison TAs represents not only an extension of campus radicalism into the teaching staff and a crystallization of it in organizational form and concerted action. More than that, it indicates, it symbolizes, it presages a fusion of that academic proletariat with the ferment among the other sections of the public employees. That means with the organized labor movement, which is the decisive social force and the ultimate power that can change this whole rotten war-making system. The Madison TAs are out to win. They deserve to win. But win, lose, or draw at this point, you have shown how to resist academic exploitation. You've asserted the power of your numbers as a union. You've blazed a trail that teaching assistants in other universities will certainly learn and profit from. Vince Haremo. All right.
What we did was take huge risks. Yes, we were workers, but we were also going through getting credentials. And the people we were striking against were going to have a lot to say about us getting those credentials. So we took a lot of risk. You cannot make change in this country. You cannot organize unions without taking risks. So that's one thing. And second, and I think this is really important, we have to keep in mind the moment we were in. Us building this union did not occur in a vacuum. Obviously, it was at a time of great ferment, not just on campuses, but around the country, with three enormous struggles going on simultaneously and the interaction of those. And that's obviously the struggle against the Vietnam War, a liberation movement among Black Americans at that time, and the women's movement. And those were all fermenting at the same time. So what we did took place in that context, and we were all part of those movements, and we understood we were part of those movements. And what we saw the union we were creating as an organization within that context and in support of and with those movements supporting us. Very, very important when you talk about organizing today. The idea that you can't just isolate a group of people and say, okay, so now they'll create a union. It doesn't work. You can't succeed. And afterwards, what do you have? What kind of union do you have? The TAA, down through history, in important moments like 2010 at the Capitol, saw itself continuing all these decades as part of a social movement. And I think that's really important. Also, one of the things I learned, certainly, is the power of collective. This was a wonderful example where it was not just one strong person or a couple of strong people or whatever. If there ever was a collective effort, it was the building of the TAA from the beginning, to the demand, just starting it in departments, insisting on them hearing us, publishing things about critical teaching, getting rejected, signing those cards, forcing them to have an election, winning an election, trying to bargain, then the strike and everything in the decades since then has been an enormous collective effort, one of the greatest collectives I've ever been a part of. And I don't know how you can do this without a collective. We were teachers, and I think of one of the great teachers. Paulo Freire said, my favorite quote from Paulo Freire is, "The scourge of neoliberalism is its denial to young people of the right to dream differently, dream and think differently." That's the scourge of neoliberalism, that people for too long have accepted the last 40 plus years, the idea of limitations. Oh, we can't do this, it has to be this way. And we're at the end of that era. We're at the beginning of an era of people like we were in then, of challenging those assumptions. And it's very encouraging.
All right.